I'm Andrew Rubin. I'm the CEO of Cymtec, and we appreciate you joining us today. As you know, Cymtec's been putting on a webinar series throughout 2011. Took a short break over the summer, and we're excited to pick it back up again now in September with a very interesting webinar and something that we're doing for the first time this year, which is a joint webinar with one of our strategic partners. As you all know from the invitation, the topic that we're going to talk about today is identifying, investigating, and responding to compliance issues before they impact your operations. So what we're going to do is we've broken the webinar into two sections. I'm going to speak briefly about our Cymtec Scout product and about what IDS contributes to the compliance landscape. And then I'm going to turn the webinar over to Chris Currin from Solutionary, and he's going to be talking about not only what Solutionary provides, but also some of the education around the compliance issues that they see in their customers every day. So with that, let's jump right in. We've got a tight time frame. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we laid out very clearly was some of the basic facts of the IDS components. People know what IDS is. It's arguably a 20-year-old technology. It's gone through a couple of cycles, a couple of life cycles. So there are some differences in IDS today versus what it was when it was first developed. But the components themselves really haven't changed very much over time. Essentially, IDS is a technology that really, in a lot of ways, doesn't have anything to do with actually protecting actively your network environment. In other words, it will never stop or block anything. It will never automatically detect a threat and stop it without human intervention. It's really a tool that's designed to collect lots of information and lots of data, and then if it does its job correctly, to take that data and information, interpret it, and present information that can be consumed by a number of different people within an organization. We're going to talk a little bit about that over the next few slides. But on the components themselves, what enables the tool to actually do this job? It's actually quite simple. No matter where you purchase your IDS or what type of deployment you use for it, there are some very core components that every IDS system will have. So first, of course, there's the sensor, which is typically some form of an appliance. It could obviously be a virtualized appliance nowadays. They're typically delivered in a format in which you can insert this in an out-of-band format into your network. It is not in line typically. It's not something that's actually going to stop, as we said before, or block traffic. And essentially what it's doing is it's looking at the traffic passing through a particular part of the network, and it's comparing it very often to a list of signatures or things that it's been told to look for. This is not an inline solution as IDS. Now, of course, one of the things that many of you are probably familiar with is that there's IDS, intrusion detection, and of course IPS, which is the prevention or protection version of it. That solution typically will be inline. That gives you an automated blocking capability that IDS was not designed to deliver. And so one of the benefits of an IDS solution from a network standpoint is simply that there is no latency or risk to the network uptime. Because of the out-of-band deployment, this is not something that's going to impact network operations. The second major component, of course, is what do we do with all this data that gets generated? And in some way, shape, or form, there has to be a back-end infrastructure to an IDS deployment. There's a database, of course, where all of this information and data is stored. There have to be engines attached to it, some form of software engine that processes the data and turns it into information. And we're going to make an argument that that's probably the single most important piece of any IDS. Collecting and generating data is certainly important, but what you do with it and the format in which you present it and consume it typically is where the value is found. Obviously, there's a GUI component to provide viewable access. And of course, the other piece that very often really doesn't get taken into consideration as much as it should is the signatures and the definitions that are provided through the IDS solution. Where do they come from? How are they researched and developed? One expression that you hear thrown around very often is that an IDS is only as good as the signatures that run on it. And that's simply because if the signatures are not of the quality necessary to be current and to be well researched, then very often your IDS may generate a lot of data, but that data isn't relevant and in some cases could be useless. The second major component that we want to talk about is the core benefits of any cloud-enabled application. And of course, as you look at this slide, there's nothing here that's specific to IDS or for that matter even Cymtec Scout. But it's very important to look at what is the difference between deploying an application in the cloud versus deploying it, let's say, in the traditional enterprise or in-house format. And many of the things that you see on this slide, things like instant scalability, the fact that you can essentially pay as you scale, the ability to deploy in a very agile format where you can literally turn things on and off in a matter of minutes instead of in a matter of weeks or months through a project deployment. The low cost of ownership, obviously, that the cloud provides. These are core components of any cloud application, and it's definitely something that we want to tie into the Scout story here. So as we look at Scout, what we're really talking about in terms of delivery is a cloud-enabled enterprise IDS. And we're going to make an argument that because of that delivery model, because of the enterprise level of the tool, we deliver the simplest, most reliable, and most cost-effective enterprise IDS in the market. And there is no doubt that it's very important not only to look at the delivery model and all of the benefits of the cloud, but equally to look at the fact that Scout is an enterprise IDS. And there's a couple of different pieces that flow into making that happen. So we look at things like, for instance, what if you could deploy IDS anytime, anywhere in the world, and do it almost instantaneously? It's fair to say that IDS has had a bad rap for a long time. It's a difficult, complicated solution, tends to have a lot of resource strain attached to the maintenance and the upkeep of it if it's done in the traditional enterprise model. So how do you deploy something that's reliable, scalable, but without the expense and the resource strain? What if you could manage the information from the IDS either in a very granular or very global view? In other words, many times now an organization is looking to deploy IDS in not one place, but maybe many different places. It could be stores, or it could be many different data centers throughout the world. And one of the challenges is how do you parse through that information and look global or look at a single site or a single sensor? What do you do about that very difficult issue of where do my signatures come from? How do I know if I'm really running a quality signature set, and how do I guarantee that they're constantly being updated in real time? What if you could obviously run an enterprise class IDS but get all the benefits of that cloud slide that we just looked at? And so what we look at with Scout, and obviously the combination of our cloud delivery and our enterprise model, is what if you could deliver all the above? What if you really could scale? What if you could do it cost effectively? What if you didn't have to sacrifice quality? And what if you could do it in an incredibly cost-effective model because of the way that you were bringing it into the organization? And it's really the combination of all of those features, so to speak, that make for a unique story in Scout. So one of the things that we like to look through, and this is an exercise that we actually talk about and utilize every day here at Cymtec, is, what are some of the key information points for IDS? And there's no doubt about it that, like any technology, there's probably exceptions in terms of who deploys it. But generally speaking, IDS really has something incredibly unique about it as a technology, regardless of who's providing it. If you look at, who purchases IDS, they tend to be organizations that are either very data sensitive or very data intensive, and there tend to be a very heavy audit compliance and regulatory oriented nature to what they do for a living. And so some examples would be things like financial services organizations, legal organizations, professional services organizations. But having said that, if we think about things like, for instance, PCI compliance today, retail has a huge regulatory oriented framework now. So we look at it and we say that there tends to be a common theme in that these are organizations that know that visibility, that security intelligence, and that regulatory reporting are all key to what they do day in and day out. We tend to find that although there is definitely a regulatory component to IDS, it's actually the IT department and the IT security department that tends to be the consumer. They're the ones that are actually buying it and using it. And so although we love to talk about the reports, and everybody understands that nowadays getting certain reports out, whether it's HIPAA compliance or PCI compliance, is a critical piece of this solution, the reality is that the people that have to buy it, set it up, make it work, and use it day in and day out, get those reports, tends to be IT, and it's literally up and down the IT spectrum. It's everybody from the security administrator all the way up to the CISO. So it's very important to not lose sight of the fact that although compliance is a big piece of the conversation, this is still a tool that typically has to get set up and run by the IT department. And along those lines, probably what we consider to be the single most important point is that this tool really does serve two masters. And obviously the weight of that is different from one organization to another. But the reality is that IDS was always designed from day one to really serve two masters within an organization. The first one being the IT department. They're the ones that have to set it up and use it. And so if it does its job right, it should give them a deeper and more forensic view, visibility into threats to the network. It could be malicious activity. It could be anomalistic activity. It could just be something unusual happening where it's not necessarily a threat that's been well defined, but it's something that's out of the norm. So if run properly and if used properly, there's a lot of great information that a tool like this should be providing IT to make the job a little bit easier of understanding the network environment. But then, of course, we flip around to the other side and we talk about the compliance aspect and the audit and the reporting needs of the organization. And nowadays, that, of course, becomes a bigger and bigger piece of the conversation. And last but not least, as we, of course, move into our slide of what Scout delivers, we talk about the bottom bullet on the previous slide, which is we all know that IDS has had somewhat of a bad rap. That traditional deployment tends to be heavy. It's expensive. It also tends to be very work-intensive once it's set up. The updating and the maintenance of the system, what we all call care and feeding, tends to be rigorous. So what we want to do is we really want to look at what can we do to make that easier. And the points on this slide, in particular, the piece about the simplest and most reliable, that's really the key to the cloud combined with the enterprise model. So setting up a sensor quickly, delivering SourceFire VRT-enabled signatures, something that Gartner obviously endorses as a very well-researched, arguably the best and most up-to-date signature set in the industry, and doing all this through a cloud-enabled model to make it simple, to make it easy, and to make it scalable. And, of course, at the very bottom, obviously Solutionary's logo is now popping up here. I'm going to be turning it over to Chris here in just a second. But in particular, one key point that I want to make is that IDS, like I said earlier, serves these two masters, but Scout is delivered as a product. It is a cloud-enabled product, but it is absolutely not a service. And so one of the things that we're always very adamant about with our customers is that you have to have a plan, you have to have a strategy for who is going to consume this information. So we believe that we deliver the product that gives you the information better and more cost-effectively than anybody else. But whether it's your IT department that's going to be looking at it, checking the alerts, and consuming the information, or it's an expert like Solutionary that does it for you, we want to make sure that we understand and answer the question, who is going to be consuming the information? And of course, one of the things that we did at Cymtec to make sure we always had a great answer to that was the partnership we have with Solutionary, the ability to layer the 24/7 human monitoring component on top of this product with a cloud delivery model. And last but not least, just because we like to throw out kind of the structure of like any cloud product, essentially our IDS is as simple as any other cloud product. We have a sensor hardware component, which we actually sell. It happens to be an appliance in Cymtec's case. And on the other side of it, like any other cloud-enabled software solution, there's essentially a subscription. And the key point, without going through the bullets, is simply to note that this subscription is completely inclusive. Everything that you need to manage, run, and utilize the IDS throughout the year is included, from your updates to your maintenance to your signature updates. It's not something where there's an a la carte menu, and that's more and more typical, of course, of cloud solutions. So with that said, I know we're going to run tight on time, and I want to make sure that I turn it over to Chris. So I'm going to make sure that I do this smoothly and change presenters to Chris Currin of Solutionary, and hopefully he'll be able to pop in here, and I would imagine hopefully take over right now.
Got it, Andrew. Thank you.
You got it.
Appreciate the introduction, Andrew. What we're going to talk about today is kind of feed off of what Andrew started us on IDS tools. In the frame of reference I want to introduce from a talking point is Verizon Business published a report in 2010 looking at institutions that had been through a breach, and this is their quote from that report: "We consistently find that nearly 90% of the time logs are available, but discovery via log analysis remains under 5%. What's interesting about that is people have the tools available to find the things that are happening to them today, but they're not catching it. And that's the really, really interesting point, because there are a lot of software tools, a lot of data warehousing tools, a lot of techniques we've had available to us for a number of years to be able to find these kinds of attacks, yet consistently, as we look back over the breaches and the kind of events that people have had happen to them, they're not catching them. So what we're going to talk about today is how we could make that a better situation for you. The company Solutionary that we're going to talk about from a service standpoint was founded in 2000, specifically founded to address that problem of looking for that needle in the haystack or trying to find the right haystack to find that needle. We process 400 billion log lines each year. We have a set of rules of 86,000 rules that help us do that. And we have 32,000 devices under contract that we're providing managed security for. And we support 185 different devices. The way that we help with a good tool like a Cymtec Scout product is through management of that device, 24/7 monitoring, helping you with threat blocking, looking at event correlation, and also helping you with configuration and tuning. IDS can be an important part of your program if it's set up and run correctly, as Andrew had said before. So when you start to look at that, you start to wonder, well, why do we need help with that? And a lot of times the interesting aspect is, well, why have people used our services? What's the value they get from that? And these are the things that people tell us. We know security. We know how to do it. We just don't have enough time, or it's too much work on our plate to get to it. So we need somebody to help us. Other times they say, look, we know how to run our network. We know the equipment. We know where it's sitting. We need somebody else to come over and help bring expertise for security with us. Another perspective is, you know what? Our data, the information we have in our environment, our name, our brand, it's just too critical. We can't afford to have a security breach, and time is of the essence, and we need somebody there working with us because we know that we're not going to have the resources around to make that happen. When you look at the way that some of this information comes across, this is an example of a real case study from a customer. This is what we call our value funnel. This is a 3-month window of information that we had processed for them. And you'll see up on the top third here that we've used technology to help us go through those events. So we've taken a situation where in a real customer environment, as an IDS was detecting signatures and doing that signature matching process with the VRT rule set that Andrew was talking about, we had 1 million events that had been identified. And from that, our team was able to boil that down to 4,500 pieces of information that really needed to be looked at. And if you want to think about it, as we talked about before, these are our haystacks we're going to go look at. Well, now we need to go look in those haystacks and try to figure out where the needles are. And out of that, we've got 42. So from a people and a time perspective, getting from 1 million down to 42, and 42 that are very important is very valuable, especially when you start to talk about network staff, trying to keep the network up, trying to keep it running in the right way. We take those 1 million log lines and you think, well, fine, I know how to do that. That's easy stuff to deal with. One of the latest trends in the industry is how these attacks are occurring. And a lot of times people will think, well, I can discount a lot of those attacks because we only do business with people in the United States. Or if you happen to be in Europe, we only do business with people in Europe. Or we know that if we're going to do business with the United States, we can only look at that type of traffic. Well, one of the interesting facts of that is from a statistical standpoint, this was a picture of the kinds of attacks that are happening. 86% of the attacks are generated from the United States across our customer base. So right away we start to see that trying to break these out and starting to identify what's important and what's not becomes a little more difficult because it's not necessarily, quote, the bad guys or a different country that's attacking us. We can't generically say, I want to block all traffic from the United States, or I want to take a step to eliminate that kind of traffic that's coming in. If we looked at it from another perspective, sometimes people say, well, this is easy because the attack signatures tell me what I need to know. I only want to go after those that are critical. Well, another interesting fact about that, here again we see 90% of the attack types that our customers are seeing are low category or informational kind of attacks. So they're the ones that are giving us the early indications of that kind of thing happening. So if you were to say, well, I'm going to ignore all of those and only focus on those that that I, quote, think are most important, all of a sudden you're missing 90% of the traffic that's coming across, and honestly, a lot of the information that's going to tell you what would be happening. So let's put that into a real picture about how this happens when it comes across. When the Sapphire SQL Slammer worm came out, we have customers running the Cymtec Scout product. We started to see a rise of UDP traffic. Our operations center was able to take that within a couple hours, take that information, build a response time, review that information, and then we started to roll out policies for our customers. And within a 4-hour window, our customers had a custom signature deployed so we could be able to detect that kind of attack that was coming across. And the way we do that, when that's working in a good environment and when it's working in a collaborative fashion, is building a team of people that work with your staff to help connect with all the different places that sit there. There's project management support. You have dedicated service delivery manager and a shared support pool within our operations centers. Our SOC is running 24/7 to make sure that the information is getting to you in a timely fashion. If there's devices that we've taken responsibility for managing, we'll make sure that they're up and running. In the middle here, a very important point is the compliance support that we provide for our customers. By doing log monitoring, by helping people look at some of this information, first of all, the story is to make sure that you've got the right things in place. Do good security. But along the path of doing good security, a lot of us have rules we need to follow, and we have auditors that need to see information as we're doing the good security that we're doing. And we've built those pieces into the system of ActiveGuard, of the portal, to be able to demonstrate for auditors how it's being done and being done in the right way. Another piece we're going to have another slide here on is a CERT team, our Security Engineering and Response team. Solutionary is dedicated to finding new information. In fact, in the last 3 months, we've published 14 zero-day vulnerabilities. This is through our own research that we've done to go out and find new things that are out there, and it's a big part of us making sure that our customers are ahead of the curve in terms of staying ahead of vulnerabilities. That Security Engineering and Research team, it's a team of 143 professionals, and their role, their job is to ensure safety and soundness across all of our customers. Research and analyze and give us early warning. We take a lot of different pieces of information into this process. We're taking feeds from data sources to help identify where some of those early warnings might be, and then we're researching that. Another big piece of that, obviously Microsoft has a big footprint for a lot of us because we run a lot of their equipment. Solutionary is one of the few MSSPs. In fact, I believe we're probably the first and only in our space that is a part of the Microsoft Active Protections program. As a part of that, we're working collaboratively with them and are on their vulnerability notification scale. And what that does is that means that our customers get some of that advanced warning as well as early detection capability as you've got these good IDSs like the Cymtec Scout out there using that rule set, detecting things, and then we're able to help make sure that those rules are tuned specifically to make sure that you're catching up with some of the new vulnerabilities coming out. A typical picture of how we make this work for you and make it work easy is through our implementation process. The point of this isn't to say that this is going to be the same for everybody. The point is to show you there's a process and a methodology around it, and that's one of the things you get when you work with a company like Solutionary, is you're going to get those techniques, you're going to get those tools to make this work easy. Here you see a 6 to 7 week schedule. Essentially what happens is your Cymtec Scout gets deployed up here in week 1, and it's in and it's running good. It's got a tuned process around it, and it can be detecting things right away. And that's good, and it can work. As we all know, then over time, you need to figure out and make sense of the information that's coming out of it. And that's what this process is right here, is to show you over time, our team will work through that installation process and what we call normalization to make sure we have a good picture of how that's going to work in your environment. And then one of the things you get with that as you're working in our environment is a portal with an incident and event manager. At some point, our team will be communicating with you and saying, hey, we think there's something that is important. As we said, we saw a picture where we had 42 needles that needed to be addressed. And we're going to need to communicate with each other. We're going to need to be able to share information. and you're going to have questions about what we're talking to you about. This tool that you're seeing right here is the way that we're going to do that. It's our window. It's your window into what our Operations Center is doing. Basically, you'll see up at the top of the screen here, this is the same tool that our Operations Center is working with. And they will communicate to you and say, hey, there's something you need to look at, whether that's via email, whether that's via phone. You will log into your portal, and you'll have real-time drillable views. You'll be able to filter and provide quick forensics analysis and looks at some of the information that's out there. Now, we will do a lot of this for you, but at some point when we're talking, you're going to have questions you're going to need to understand. You'll even need to do research on, well, I don't understand where that's coming from because that firewall is over here, and those IPs usually don't talk to that address. What does that mean? You're going to need to see the same information we do. And being able to get to that in an easy, concise, accessible manner will make the difference, especially when we're talking about time in terms of seconds or minutes as it's affecting your network. So in summary, I want to come back to my needle haystack story a little bit, just to leave this with a final picture of some of the benefit that Solutionary can bring. Again, the idea of a lot of this information that's going to be coming out of these good tools, like the Cymtec Scout, that has a great signature set behind it, is a lot of things that need to be looked at and reviewed. And somebody's going to need to review that and do it in a way that's consistent, repeatable, and something that can be demonstrated. Need to be addressed for your organization.
Thanks, Chris. And really appreciate it and hope everybody found the combined information very useful. I know we ran a few minutes longer. A lot of information to handle there coming from both Cymtec and Solutionary. But we hope that the combination provides a picture of not only the product side, but also the services that it takes to take something like IDS and really not only integrate it into the organization, but also really get the most out of it. Find the ROI beyond just the reports that people talk about all the time. And so with that, we appreciate your time. Given that we've run a little bit long, we're going to go ahead and conclude now. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send them to sales@cymtec.com. We will absolutely make sure that we get them answered. We'll get them over to Chris if that's the right way to get them answered. And as I said at the beginning, this is an ongoing series that we've been conducting at Cymtec, and so please look for future invitations, and we look forward to getting any of your feedback. Thanks so much, and take care. Bye-bye.